My name is Lorraine Ellis. I'm 62 years old, and last weekend I was told I didn't match my own son's wedding theme. So they sat me in the kitchen, not even at a guest table. I stayed quiet. I didn't cause a scene. But then a young man walked in, saw the badge on my bag, and saluted me. That single moment turned the whole room. If you've ever felt invisible in the life you helped build, stay with me. This story isn't about revenge. It's about respect and the quiet power of being seen for who you truly are. I hadn't touched the box in over 20 years. It was still wrapped in the same pale gold paper Edward had chosen himself, taped too tightly at the corners, the way he always did, as if he didn't quite trust it to stay closed. I had to slide a butter knife beneath the seam just to open it. Inside the ivory dress lay folded between tissue like pressed petals. I hadn't opened it since the night he passed. He gave me that dress for our 30th anniversary. I remember thinking it was too much, too fine for someone like me. But Edward just smiled in that quiet way of his and said, "It's the kind of dress a woman wears when she walks into a room and everyone knows she belongs there." I'd laughed at the time, but he meant it. And when I wore it, just that one night, I almost believed it myself. We never had the kind of life that called for fine things. We raised Michael on a military salary and a nurse's shifts, but Edward always believed in marking what mattered. That night he made me a steak with rosemary butter-lit candles, even though the power hadn't gone out, and played the same record we danced to at our wedding. I wore the dress, and we slow danced in socks across our linoleum floor until my heels ached and I couldn't stop smiling. It was the last time I saw him completely at peace. A month later, the cancer returned. He was gone by Christmas. Since then, I've kept the dress packed away, not out of grief, but out of reverence. It was the last gift he ever gave me. Somehow, even now, the fabric still held the faintest scent of his cologne, something warm and earthy I could never quite replace. When Michael's wedding invitation came, I read it 3 times before I let myself feel anything. Heavy cream cardstock, embossed lettering, the whole 9 yards. It was the kind of invitation that said, "We are important now." The kind people pinned to bulletin boards in open-concept kitchens. There was no mention of me in the main print. But inside, on a small card tucked in the envelope, was a handwritten note. "We hope you can come. Let us know about flights. Michael, no love, Mom." "No? Can't wait to see you. Just logistics like a business transaction." Still, I smiled. Maybe that was just his way. Maybe it was nerves. Or maybe he didn't know what to say to someone who'd become unfamiliar to him. I stood in front of my closet that night longer than I meant to. I ran my fingers over old sweaters, suit jackets that hadn't fit right in years. A pair of heels I hadn't worn since Edward's funeral. And then at the very back, the box. The moment I opened it, I knew. That dress would be my way of honoring the man who raised Michael with me, the man who taught him to tie his shoes and write thank you notes and shake hands firmly. The man Michael now rarely mentioned. I pressed it myself, carefully stitch by stitch, and packed it into a garment bag with a lavender sachet. I didn't tell Michael I planned to wear it. Not because I expected a reaction, but because I doubted he'd notice either way. The flight to Connecticut was uneventful. I traveled light, 1 suitcase, 1 garment bag, and a book I never opened. At the airport, I stood by the curb waiting, watching expensive cars whisk strangers away. Finally, Michael pulled up in a leased SUV. He stepped out in a collared shirt I didn't recognize, expensive sunglasses perched on his head like he'd just come from a golf course. "Hey, Mom," he said, barely looking up as he opened the trunk. "I hope traffic wasn't too bad," I said, slipping my things inside. "It's been worse," he replied, already back in the driver's seat. The ride to their home was filled with polite silence. He pointed out a few buildings. "That's Jess's yoga place. That's where the reception will be." But never once asked about the flight, or about me, or about Edward. Their house was modern, minimal, all soft neutrals and sharp corners. Jessica opened the door before we knocked, greeting me with a rehearsed smile. "You made it." "That's great," she said, already turning toward the kitchen. "We've just started prep. Michael followed me in hands in his pockets. Guest room's through here. Let me show you." The guest room, or home office/guest space as Jessica called it, had a pull-out couch, a glass desk, and a screensaver of their engagement photo. On the desk was a white vase with 3 tulips and a card that read, "Welcome. Excited for the weekend. Jess and Mike." No love, no mom. As I set my things down, I noticed the hallway. The wall where we'd always hung the old family photo. The one of Edward in uniform holding toddler Michael and me in my nurse scrubs. Was bare. In its place hung an abstract painting of swirling gray and white brushstrokes. "Did you move the photo?" I asked. Michael glanced up. "Oh, yeah. We're going with more of a minimalist aesthetic." Jess thought it didn't really match the theme. I looked at the canvas, then back at him. Theme modern clean lines, cohesive tones, that kind of thing. I said nothing, just nodded and sat down on the edge of the pull-out couch. That night, while they prepped hors d'oeuvres and emailed caterers, I sat alone in the office, running my hand across the smooth fabric of the dress. I thought of Edward. I thought of the woman I used to be. Not just a wife, not just a mother, but a captain who led triage under fire, who stitched wounds with shaking hands and barked orders over gunfire. That part of me had faded, folded away like this dress, but I remembered her. I remembered who I was when I wore it the first time, and I needed to wear it again. Not for Michael, not for anyone else in that house, just for me. The next evening, we sat around a kitchen island that looked more like a showroom counter than a place for family meals. Jessica chopped rosemary with the precision of a Food Network host, her gold bangle sliding up and down her wrist with every movement. Michael scrolled through something on his tablet. Seating charts, I assumed. I offered to help, but Jessica just smiled politely and said, "We've got it under control." So I sat, folded my hands, waited for a moment to feel like someone's mother again. "I wanted to ask," I began softly during a lull in their chatter about playlist timing and centerpiece candles. "Do you mind if I wear something ivory to the ceremony?" Michael didn't look up right away. Jessica paused mid-chop. I thought white was reserved for the bride. Jessica said, not unkindly, just precise the way someone might point out a typo on an invitation. "It's not white," I said. "It's ivory. And it's just an old dress Edward gave me. I thought it might be nice. Sentimental." Michael finally looked up. "Which dress?" "From our 30th anniversary," I said. "You probably don't remember. It's been in the closet since he passed." He pressed his lips together the way he used to when I told him to clean his room. I think Jess was hoping everything would look cohesive. "You know, for the pictures, she's really working hard on the aesthetic." Jessica nodded. "We're doing soft neutrals. Champagne sage rose gold. Ivory might stand out more than you think." I felt the heat rise behind my collar. "It's a simple dress," I said gently. "Not flashy. Just a piece of him I've kept." Michael shifted. "It's not that we don't want you to look nice, Mom. It's just white ivory cream. Those are bridal colors. People might get confused." "Confused," I repeated. He gave a quick laugh, the kind that says, "Let's not make this awkward." Not confused, just, "It's symbolic. You know how weddings are. Everything means something now." I sat back in my chair. "I see." He tried again, softening his tone. "It's not personal. Jess and I just want everything to reflect who we are as a couple. Clean lines, intentional choices. It's more about the message." And suddenly I understood. The dress didn't match the message. And maybe I didn't either. "I suppose you'll want me to wear something new," I said quietly. "If you have something in a softer tone, like dove gray or navy, that would be perfect." Jessica offered, smiling again. "Sure," I said. "I'll see what I have." The conversation moved on. Color palettes, chair sashes, gluten-free hors d'oeuvres. But I wasn't there anymore. I was back in my bedroom at home, opening that dress box for the first time in 2 decades. running my hand along the fabric Edward had chosen, hearing his voice in my mind calling me his queen. There had been nothing loud or grand about Edward. He'd never made six figures, never owned a vacation home, never used the word aesthetic unironically. But when he looked at me, he saw someone. Not a prop, not a detail to manage, not a flaw in the theme. Just me. After dinner, I helped clear the dishes while Jessica coordinated cake delivery over the phone. Michael poured himself a glass of red wine and leaned against the counter. "You okay, Mom?" I nodded. "Of course. It's your big weekend." He took a sip. "You've always been low maintenance. I appreciate that." I smiled. But inside something pinched. Because I wasn't low maintenance. I was just quiet. And quiet people often get mistaken for agreeable, invisible, disposable. "Did you ever think," I asked softly, "that maybe I've kept quiet all these years because I thought it was easier for you?" Michael looked up confused. "What do you mean?" I shook my head. "Never mind. Just mother talk." But what I didn't say, what I couldn't say in that moment, was that I saw what was happening. I saw the way he'd curated a life that no longer included where he came from. There were no pictures of his father, no reminders of deployments or sacrifice, not even a hint that he was raised by someone who'd served 3 tours in war zones while still packing his lunch and helping with algebra homework. In this version of his life, I was background, a soft shadow meant to appear in 1 or 2 photos, not in the main story. And God forbid I wear white. Back in the guest room, I hung the dress up just to look at it again. The fabric shimmered faintly under the overhead light, not bright enough to be bridal, not plain enough to be dismissed, just enough to be noticed, which apparently was too much. I sat on the edge of the pull-out couch staring at it. It wasn't about the color, it wasn't even about the dress. It was about erasure. He didn't want me to be visible, not as I really was, not as the woman who'd stood by his father, not as the soldier, not as the widow who still slept on one side of the bed. He wanted the version of me that fit in a beige kitchen, said yes to polite suggestions, and disappeared into group photos like soft furniture. I looked at the dress one more time before turning out the light. I still planned to wear it. Maybe not to the ceremony, but one way or another I would not go unseen. The first time I felt it, the shift. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just tired from the flight or not used to how modern weddings worked, that maybe the rules had changed and I hadn't caught up, but deep down I knew. It wasn't that I'd been excluded with cruelty. It was quieter than that, gentler, like dust settling on a photograph that no one looks at anymore. It started with the ceremony schedule. Jessica had printed it out in full color and left a few copies scattered across the kitchen island, probably for review or editing. I wasn't snooping. I was just looking for the tea bags, but my eyes caught my own name, or rather the absence of it. The program listed each event like a Broadway production. Prelude processional reading by Maid of Honor. Welcome by Father of the Bride, exchange of vows recessional. Under the section labeled Family Recognition, Jessica's parents were mentioned by name. There was even a note that her mother would present her with a wedding handkerchief, a family tradition passed down for 4 generations. On Michael's side, just 3 words. Family. Seated. Quietly. No welcome, no speech, no nod to the woman who raised him through deployments and funerals, and scraped knee mornings. Later that day, I waited until Jessica had stepped outside to take a phone call about the string quartet. Michael was pouring himself a drink, something fancy from a decanter that didn't look like it had ever seen dust. I watched the amber swirl in the glass before I spoke. "Michael," I said gently, "I noticed the program on the counter." He turned guarded. "Yeah, what about it? I just didn't see anything for me to do during the ceremony. I thought maybe I'd do a reading or say something about your father." Michael looked uncomfortable. "Jess and I wanted to keep things tight. Not too many speakers. You know how long these things can drag." "I wouldn't say much," I offered. "Just a few words about family. Maybe a small tribute to your dad." He sipped his drink. "We just don't want it to feel heavy." "Grief isn't heavy when it's wrapped in love," I said quietly. He set the glass down. "It's not personal, Mom. It's just a different kind of wedding. More curated. Like a clean canvas. A clean canvas." And I apparently was a smudge. I didn't argue. I nodded. The way I'd nodded when he forgot to call on my birthday last year. The way I'd nodded when he never mentioned to Jessica that I'd served as a captain in the Army Medical Corps. I had become good at nodding. That evening, we had what they called a planning dinner. Not quite a rehearsal, not quite a party. Just immediate family and the wedding coordinator. Jessica had printed little personalized folders for each of us. Navy blue gold monograms, color-coded tabs. Mine had my name in embossed script, Lorraine Ellis. Inside was a minute-by-minute breakdown of the weekend. Welcome, drinks, spa appointments, hair and makeup call times. Every moment accounted for. I turned to the seating chart for the reception. Table 1, bride and groom. Table 2, Jessica's parents. Table 3, bridal party. Table 4, groomsmen and partners. Table 5, friends from Yale. Table 6, Jessica's aunts. Table 7, family friends. Table 8, high school teachers. Table 9, my name, seated between Cousin Gerald, who once ruined Thanksgiving with a political rant, and Aunt Marlene, who had called me Ellen for the last 10 years. I blinked. No mother of the groom seat near the couple, no corsage, no recognition. I cleared my throat. "I think there's been a mix-up," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I'm at table 9. Michael leaned over to look. "Oh, yeah, we had to shuffle a few people when Jess's cousin flew in late. But you've got a great spot. Right near the bar." I managed a smile. "Right near the exit, too." He laughed. "Exactly. Prime real estate," Jessica added. "We tried to keep everything balanced. Your table has a great view of the first dance. That seemed to be the theme, a great view. From a distance." When I got back to my room that night, I sat down on the edge of the bed and opened the folder again. My name gleamed in gold against the navy paper. There were no instructions for me to walk with Michael. No note about a mother-son moment. No speech, no candle lighting, not even a corsage pickup. I was included in the seating plan, but not in the story. I closed the folder and set it aside. The garment bag hung quietly in the corner. The ivory dress inside seemed to pulse with something. Not defiance, but memory. It wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was evidence. Evidence that I had loved. That I had lived. That I had once been the center of someone's world. Now I was a guest. Expected to smile. Expected to blend in. Expected to disappear by 9 p.m. I reached into my suitcase and pulled out a small photo I always traveled with. The one of Edward holding Michael on his shoulders, both of them in baseball caps beaming at a 4th of July fair. I used to keep it on my desk. Now, it lived in a book sleeve folded into my clothes like a secret. I stared at it for a long time, not crying, not even angry. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that grows when you realize something that's always been true. They didn't ask me not to speak. They just never thought I would. The morning of the wedding unfolded with the kind of polished chaos that only happens when everything's been rehearsed too many times. The florists arrived at dawn. The hairstylists rolled in with their curling wands and color palettes. Jessica's voice echoed from upstairs. Brisk, efficient, already managing someone. I kept to myself. I always had. At 7 o'clock sharp, I laid the dress on the bed and just looked at it for a moment. The ivory shimmer had dulled slightly over the years, softened into something warmer, more lived in. It reminded me of old lace curtains left to catch the light in a quiet house. Still beautiful. Still intact. I slipped into it slowly. The zipper was a little more stubborn than I remembered, and I had to take a breath to steady my hands. The fabric settled over me like memory. Not tight, not loose, just right. As if it had waited for this morning and no other, I pinned a small silver nightingale badge to the inside seam. It wasn't flashy, and I knew no one would see it, but I would feel it. That mattered. It had been a gift from a young medic during my second deployment. To the captain who never let a soldier go dark alone. I'd kept it hidden in a jewelry box for years. But today it felt right to carry it with me. I did my own hair, a low bun. Neat, simple, exactly how I used to wear it beneath my helmet. No extension, no curling iron. Just me. As I stepped out into the hallway, a few heads turned, mostly staff. One of the junior bridesmaids did a double take. Her gaze drifted from my face to the dress, then quickly away like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to stare. I kept walking. When I reached the main room, the bridal party was clustered near the picture window, posing with champagne flutes and monogrammed silk robes. Jessica's mother was adjusting someone's veil. The photographer was directing people like a general. I paused in the doorway, not wanting to intrude, not needing to, just taking it all in. Then I saw Michael. His eyes met mine, and for the briefest second his face fell. Not in horror, not in anger, but in dread. He crossed the room in long strides and took my elbow, gently steering me toward the hallway. "Mom," he said under his breath. "Can we talk for a minute?" His tone was too casual to be genuine. Of course, I replied. I knew what was coming. But I let him walk me away anyway. He led me toward the back hallway, the one connecting the kitchen to the staging area. No guests ventured back there. Just florists, chefs, and forgotten chairs. When we stopped, he turned to face me. He didn't speak right away. "You look really elegant," he said. "Thank you." But he continued rubbing the back of his neck. "Jess is a little concerned about the color. Ivory," I said. "Not white." He nodded. "I know. But it photographs close enough. And she's trying to maintain a cohesive tone for the visuals." I almost laughed at that. Visuals, as if weddings were branding projects now. But I didn't. Michael looked genuinely uncomfortable. I saw the boy in him then, the one who used to run to me after nightmares. But this man was different. He was calculating now, weighing optics against obligation. "We just don't want anyone to think you're trying to outshine the bride," he said. I blinked. "You think I'm trying to steal attention from Jessica?" "No," he said quickly. "No, of course not. But Jess's parents, especially her mother, they're really particular. And this whole thing's been kind of a production. There's a look we're going for." There it was again. The look. He wasn't just managing a wedding. He was managing me. I took a deep breath. "So what would you like me to do?" Michael hesitated. "Maybe just for the photos you could stay back a bit. Like, maybe wait in the kitchen area until they're done." I stared at him. "The kitchen," I repeated. He shifted. "It's just for a little while. There's a nice little alcove. Out of the way but comfortable. I promise I'll come get you as soon as it's over." A quiet flush of heat crept up my neck. Not rage, not sadness. Recognition. "You don't want me to be seen," I said gently. Michael looked hurt. "That's not true." I kept my voice steady. "Then why am I being asked to wait near the ovens while the bridal party takes photos?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I'm just trying to make everything run smoothly." "Of course you are," I said. "Smooth is important." He stepped back. "Please, Mom, just help me out here." I gave him a long look. Not angry, just final. "Where exactly would you like me to sit?" He pointed. "There's a folding chair behind the prep counter. They've got pastries back there if you're hungry." I nodded once. "All right," I said. He looked startled. "Really," I smoothed the front of the dress. "I've been told to wait in back before. I know how to disappear when needed." Michael touched my arm. "It's not personal." "No," I said. "That's what makes it worse." And then I walked. I walked past the polished tables and champagne pyramids, past the imported flower walls and branded welcome signs. I passed the staging room and stepped through the service door that led to the kitchen. No one stopped me. The kitchen was warm and humming with movement. Clinking trays, muffled timers, someone scolding a junior server for misplaced napkins. And in the corner, just like he said, was a folding chair beside a stack of crates. I sat. From where I was, I could hear laughter and camera shutters. Jessica's voice bright and performative. Music playing on someone's phone. No one came to check on me. I smoothed the fabric of the dress across my knees and folded my hands. They had asked me not to wear white, but what they really meant was don't be seen. What they really meant was make yourself small. So I did what I had learned to do in war zones and widowhood. I sat still. I disappeared. But only from them. Not from myself. Never from myself. The kitchen was buzzing with the choreography of 100 small invisible jobs. Trays rotated in and out of ovens, stems of flowers, clipped and tucked sauces stirred with urgency. No one looked at me, and I didn't expect them to. A woman in an old ivory dress, sitting off to the side, was hardly the strangest thing a wedding kitchen had ever seen. I sat there for 20, maybe 30 minutes. My watch was in my bag, and no one had come to get me. Not that I thought they would. The chair wobbled slightly every time I shifted my weight. There was a faint chill in the air, not from temperature but from the metal and glass and tile that surrounded me. Stainless steel surfaces reflected fragmented pieces of my image, an arm here, a sliver of fabric there. I looked like a ghost. Pale quiet hovering just out of view. I stared at my hands folded neatly in my lap. I had trimmed my nails the night before, shaped them the way Edward used to like. I remembered painting them this same soft pink before his retirement ceremony. He said they looked like cherry blossoms trying to stay brave. I must have smiled at the thought because I didn't notice someone approaching. "Ma'am," a young voice said just behind me. I turned. A young man, barely more than a boy, maybe 20, stood holding a tray of champagne flutes. His eyes weren't judging or curious. They were searching. "I'm sorry to bother you," he continued, setting the tray down carefully. "But is that a nightingale pin?" I looked down, startled. I'd forgotten it was there, tucked just inside the collar seam. The small silver badge, shaped like a lantern. "Yes," I said slowly. "It is." He stepped a little closer, lowering his voice. "Did you serve in the Army? I nodded. Captain Lorraine Ellis, Army Medical Corps. Retired." He took a breath like someone had punched the wind out of him. "Ramadi?" he asked, almost whispering. I froze. "Yes," I said, "twice." He blinked quickly, fighting whatever was rising in his throat. "My dad was there. 2nd Infantry. He was injured in 2007 during a night convoy ambush." He said a medic captain pulled him out, stayed behind while they took fire. Said she kept yelling, "We don't leave anyone behind, not today." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He looked at me, really looked, and I saw it hit him like a wave. "That was you," he said. I hadn't heard those words in over a decade. Not out loud, not with meaning. We don't leave anyone behind. Not today. I had shouted that across sand, smoke, and chaos. I'd said it to keep a bleeding soldier awake, to keep the new recruits from breaking down, to keep myself from collapsing under the weight of it all. "I remember him," I said softly. "Shrapnel through the upper thigh." He was scared but still trying to crawl. I told him I'd be the last one out. The young man nodded, eyes glassy. "He talks about you. Still. Said he never even saw your face through the dust and the blood. Just remembered your voice. He didn't know your name until someone mentioned it at a VA clinic years later. I never thought I'd meet you. I didn't know what to say." In that moment, something in me rearranged. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small shift back into place, like a spine realigning after years of quiet ache. He looked down, embarrassed now, Sorry, I didn't mean to. It's just, you're kind of a legend in my family. I reached for a napkin and offered it to him. No need to apologize. I'm just surprised anyone still remembers. He let out a laugh that cracked halfway through. Are you kidding? He made me memorize the story like a bedtime tale. Said bravery isn't about uniforms or medals. It's about staying when it would have been easier to run. I sat back stunned, not by his words, by the fact that this, a total stranger, had seen me more clearly in 1 minute than my own son had in years. I'm Jason, by the way, he added quickly. Jason Wolfe. I smiled. Nice to meet you, Jason. He looked like he wanted to say more, but someone from the catering staff called his name. He turned toward the voice, then back to me. I won't forget this, he said. Neither will I. He hesitated again, then did something that nearly undid me. He raised his hand to his brow and gave me a clean, silent salute. I nodded once, holding his gaze. As he disappeared through the double doors, I sat in that rickety kitchen chair surrounded by chafing dishes and linen bins, and felt more seen than I had at any moment in my own son's wedding. I reached up and gently touched the Nightingale badge pinned to my collar. It was still there. So was I. And for the first time that day, I felt exactly where I was meant to be. I remained in the kitchen for a while longer after Jason left. Not because I felt forgotten. That moment had passed. But because something had shifted. I no longer sat out of exile. I sat in choice. There was power in that. I could hear the music change as guests began filtering into the reception hall. Clinking glasses, light applause, the piano version of something modern that had been stripped of its beat and dressed up for formality. I didn't rush. I adjusted my neckline, repinned a stray strand of hair, and stood when I was ready. When I opened the side door leading to the main hall, a burst of cool air greeted me. The room had been transformed. All blush linens and crystal chandeliers, tall centerpieces blooming with roses. Every table had a glowing name card tucked into a gold holder. Jessica's vision executed flawlessly. No one noticed me at first. I slipped in between servers, moving with precision. But as I reached the side of the room and found my seat at table 9, I noticed something strange. Eyes. Not many. Just a few. A woman near the dessert table tilted her head as I passed. A man in a dark suit gave a small nod. Polite. Respectful. Nothing dramatic. But it was enough to feel... I sat down next to Aunt Marlene, who was deeply invested in explaining her sciatica to Cousin Gerald. Neither of them looked my way. But across the room I saw Jason again. This time behind the bar, refilling a tray of champagne. His eyes caught mine, and though he didn't wave, he gave the smallest lift of his chin. A quiet signal. I returned it. The moment passed, but the effect lingered. Over the next hour, as guests found their places and wine was poured, I began to sense something shifting in the air. A young woman, maybe a friend of Jessica's, passed by my table, slowed briefly, and said, "Thank you for your service," before moving on. I wasn't sure who had told her. I simply nodded. Minutes later, a tall man with a trimmed beard stopped beside me. "Captain Ellis," he asked softly enough not to draw attention. I blinked. "Yes, I'm Thomas. I manage events here. My husband served in Afghanistan. I just wanted to shake your hand." We did. Quietly, without fuss. "Jason told you?" I asked. He smiled. "He did. He said you saved his dad. I just did my job." "You did it well," he said. Then hesitated. "If you'd like, I could move your seat. There's space closer to the couple. Or if you'd prefer, I could speak with the MC about acknowledging—" "No," I said, gently cutting him off with a smile. "But thank you. Are you sure I've had more recognition in the last 20 minutes than I've had in years?" I said. "That's enough." He nodded, touched my shoulder lightly in a way that felt genuine, then disappeared back into the flow of the event. I turned my attention to the dance floor. The bridal party had begun filtering in. Gowns, shimmering heels clicking across the parquet. Jessica glided beside Michael, her smile wide and bright. She looked perfect. She looked proud. And Michael. His smile didn't falter. He didn't glance toward my table. He didn't scan the crowd to find me. Maybe he didn't think I'd come back inside. Or maybe he assumed I would stay hidden, as I had so many times before. But I wasn't hidden now. I was just quiet. Guests around me began whispering. I heard my name once. Lorraine followed by Captain, followed by a pause. Someone leaned over to her neighbor and murmured something I couldn't make out. Heads turned subtly. I didn't shrink. I straightened my spine. The waiter came by to take drink orders. When I declined the wine, he gave a small smile and said, "Captain Ellis." "That's you right, Jason told us." "It's an honor." I nodded. "Thank you." That was the theme of the night. Not applause, not microphones, just acknowledgement. Small, sincere, and unexpected. It was all I ever wanted. I didn't need a speech or spotlight. I didn't need Jessica's curated blessing or Michael's curated silence. What I needed, and what I finally received, was the recognition that I had mattered, not just in someone's memory but in this very room, on this very day. As the reception carried on, I let the music wash over me. I ate the salad, sipped ginger ale, and watched as people danced in shoes they'd regret by midnight. I laughed softly at the flower girl spinning in circles at the groomsman who almost tripped during his entrance. All of it beautiful, all of it distant. And that was fine. Because in the corner of a grand hall at a table near the bar sat a woman in an ivory dress who had once dragged a bleeding man out of a burning truck while bullets split the air around her. A woman who had steadied hands in surgery tents, comforted boys who cried for mothers they'd never see again, and still made it home to raise a son who no longer saw her, but strangers did, and maybe that was enough. The speeches began as the sun dipped low behind the country club's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting gold light across the perfectly arranged tables. Jessica's father stood first charming and rehearsed sharing childhood stories of his daughter, and ending with a toast so polished it might have come from a teleprompter. The room applauded, glasses clinked, and servers moved in synchronized lines to deliver the next course. I remained at table 9 folding and refolding the corner of my linen napkin, not out of nerves, but to steady my thoughts. There was no speech from Michael's side of the family, no nod in my direction, not even an informal mention. Jessica had planned every second, and apparently Michael had agreed to every omission. Still, I sat, dignified, whole. I didn't fidget, I didn't stare him down. I simply existed, and for the first time in a long while that felt like enough. Halfway through dessert, a girl, maybe 19 or 20, made her way over from one of the back tables. She was tall and freckled with a quiet energy that reminded me of someone I couldn't quite name. "Excuse me," she said, hesitating just behind my chair. I turned, giving her a small smile. "I hope this isn't weird," she said quickly. "I'm Jenna, Jessica's cousin." "Nice to meet you, Jenna." She shifted awkwardly, then sat in the empty chair beside me without being asked. A boldness I appreciated. "Someone told me—" "Well, a few people said you used to be in the military." I said, "Army, Medical Corps?" She looked impressed. "My roommate's thinking about enlisting. She's scared. Her parents keep saying she'll never be taken seriously as a woman in uniform." "She might not be," I said honestly. "Not right away. But respect that's earned tends to last longer." Jenna absorbed that, then asked, "Do you ever miss it?" Sometimes I said, "Mostly I miss the clarity." You knew what mattered. There weren't layers of politeness disguising disappointment. She smiled. "Like a wedding." I laughed softly. "Exactly like a wedding." We sat for a moment, both aware of the irony. "Thanks," she said quietly. Then stood. "Just thanks." I nodded. She walked back to her table and I watched her go, wondering how many young women were out there questioning whether their worth depended on dresses and dinner rolls or something sturdier. The plates were cleared. Coffee was poured. Michael passed by our table on his way to the bar, glanced right past me, then leaned in to speak with Jessica's brother. He hadn't looked at me once. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It was more like confirming something I already knew. I pushed my chair back gently and stood. No one noticed. I walked calmly through the archway and out the side door into the dusky evening. The cool air felt like a balm. The parking circle was quiet. Most of the guests were still inside them, and the valets stood in a small huddle joking softly. To the left, just under the awning, stood the event coordinator, Thomas, the man who had earlier offered to move my seat. He looked up as I approached. "Captain Ellis," he said, straightening instinctively. "Everything all right?" "Yes," I said, "but I need to speak with you privately for a moment." "Of course." He gestured toward the check-in podium. I reached into the clutch I'd carried all evening and pulled out a slim envelope. Inside was a copy of the financial agreement I'd signed 6 months ago. The one Jessica never asked for, the one Michael never said thank you for. "I'd like to rescind the remainder of my contribution," I said calmly. He blinked. I'm not sure I follow. The final vendor payments? Floral lighting music, the string quartet. They were scheduled to be covered through my account." "Yes, that's correct. I'd like that stopped. Please transfer the outstanding balance to Michael and Jessica." He hesitated. "Are you sure it's quite a large—" "I'm sure," I said, tone even. "I funded this wedding in good faith, assuming I was part of it. Since that is no longer the case, I think it's appropriate that the remaining expenses reflect the new reality." He swallowed hard, nodded. "I'll need to update the billing system tonight. Will you be notifying them?" "No. You may do so after the event. I don't want drama, just clarity." He was silent for a moment, then said, "You're very composed. I've survived worse," I said with the faintest smile. He didn't ask what I meant, but I think he understood. I handed him the envelope. He accepted it like a fragile object. Then I turned, walked back into the building, and took my seat once again at table 9. The music had started. Someone was giving another toast. Laughter floated like confetti through the air. Michael didn't notice I'd been gone. Jessica was twirling under soft light. No one knew the budget had just shifted, that the woman in the ivory dress sitting quietly at the edge of the room had just drawn a line in permanent ink. But I knew, and for the first time that day I felt not just seen, I felt in control. The sky had melted into a deep blue by the time the main courses were cleared, and the dessert plates began to clatter softly into the servers' trays. Fairy lights blinked awake above the dance floor, weaving gold into the dusk like stars that had politely arrived on cue. The wedding had shifted into its next act, looser, louder, more relaxed. I remained at table 9 watching the room as it changed around me. The music softened into a slow, jazzy tune, one of those covers meant to make old love sound new again. Couples filtered toward the parquet floor, drawn together by the beat or the champagne or maybe just the mood. I sipped my water and folded my napkin again, instinctively pressing it into tight corners and creases. Not because I was nervous, but because my hands still wanted to serve a purpose. A part of me wondered idly how much of the night Michael had planned. I'd seen his signature in the printed programs, and Jessica had clearly coordinated the color palette down to the salad forks. But I didn't see him walk toward me. I didn't feel his gaze. If he noticed I'd returned after leaving the kitchen, he gave no sign of it. And yet, others did. 2 tables over, a woman with a French twist and a velvet shawl turned her head just slightly. Our eyes met for a second. She smiled. Not warmly, not coldly, but with that curious, respectful tilt people give when they've just been told something meaningful about you. I nodded. It kept happening in quiet waves. A subtle shift. A server walked by and said, "Excuse me, ma'am," with a little more deference than earlier. A man from Jessica's side of the family passed and murmured Captain Ellis like a greeting rather than a label. Why, even one of the teen cousins, a lanky boy with braces and oversized shoes, gave me a shy thumbs up from across the room. I had done nothing to invite this. That was what made it so powerful. I hadn't made a toast. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't stood up at the head table and demanded my place. All I had done was sit, with clarity, with steadiness, with the full weight of who I really was. And somehow people had begun to see. The band shifted into a new melody, a low, rolling instrumental that invited couples to the floor with open arms. The edges of the room shimmered in gold. I was just about to excuse myself to the hallway when a shadow crossed beside me. Captain Ellis, a deep voice said, polished with age, but sharp with intention. I turned. A tall man in a charcoal suit stood beside my table, posture impeccable. A half-familiar face that bore resemblance to Jessica's. He extended his hand. "Colonel Richard Langley," he said. "Jessica's uncle, Army Air Corps. Retired!" I stood instinctively and shook his hand with my right. He gripped it firmly but gently, the way one soldier does when he meets another whose reputation precedes her. "Would you honor me with a dance?" he asked. I blinked, caught off guard. It's been a while." His smile deepened. "It's muscle memory, like loading a rucksack. You never really forget." I allowed myself to laugh, the kind that comes from surprise, not humor, and placed my hand lightly in his. He didn't guide me to the center of the floor. He brought us to the far edge where the light was soft and the movement less frantic. We began to sway slowly, as if we'd been doing it for years. "It's an honor to finally meet you," he said. "You've heard about me." He nodded once. "The Nightingale pin, the Bronze Star, Ramadi. Your name came up more than once." I didn't respond. It was still strange to hear my history spoken aloud in a place like this, surrounded by peonies and Prosecco. "My son served," he added. "Different unit, but same desert. He always said it was the medics who had the hardest jobs, who got the least recognition." "It was just part of the work," I said quietly. He glanced toward the head table. "They don't know who you are, do they?" "I don't think they want to," I replied, not bitterly, just plainly. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Sometimes we spend years being invisible in rooms we helped build, but time has a way of revealing things. And people." The song ended. We stepped apart. He gave me a small, precise bow, a habit etched deep from another life. I returned it with a hand to my heart. As he walked back to his seat, I remained near the edge of the dance floor watching. That was when another guest, a woman in her 50s with a kind smile, came up and said, "Thank you for your service." I nodded. "You're welcome." She leaned in and whispered, "It's good to see you here. You deserve to be." And then she was gone. I stood alone, not feeling alone at all. Back at table 9, I found a small folded piece of paper left on my bread plate. I unfolded it slowly, half expecting a leftover toast or menu card. Instead it read, "I heard what you did. Not tonight, but long ago. My daughter wants to serve too. Thank you for making that path visible." It wasn't signed. I sat back in my chair, holding the paper lightly in my fingers. Michael still hadn't looked at me. Jessica, wrapped in the whirlwind of family and flashbulbs, hadn't spared me a glance. But none of that mattered anymore. I had arrived in that room invisible. Now I was seen. Not because I demanded it, but because I stopped hiding. I stayed seated as the band played on, as glasses were refilled, and guests wandered from table to table in search of old friends and new gossip. The wedding had begun to settle into that final golden stretch. The one where the edges blur and the performances fall away. Laughter was looser now. Shoes were off. Cake had been sliced. Everyone had softened, including me. Another young woman approached me, not the first of the night, but somehow the most tentative. She looked barely 20 with a nervous energy and a dress that still had its tags tucked at the collar. She hovered beside my chair until I noticed her. "Hi," she said. "Sorry. I know you've probably had 100 people come up to you already, but..." I smiled gently. "Go on." She glanced over her shoulder. "I'm Rachel. I'm in ROTC at Ohio State. My cousin said you were a captain in the army. That you served in Ramadi, I did. I said, medical corps. Her eyes lit up. That's what I'm training for. Field medic track. I've been second-guessing it lately, honestly. My parents think I should switch to something safer. I nodded, remembering the echoes of that same resistance in my own family long ago. It won't be easy, I said, but if it's the right kind of hard, the kind that stretches you rather than breaks you, then you'll know. She nodded like I'd handed her something solid to hold on to. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. And just like that, she was gone again. But her presence lingered like a warm echo. I turned slightly in my chair, watching the head table. Michael was watching me. His expression wasn't angry. It was off balance. He looked like someone hearing music he didn't understand. His hand rested limply on Jessica's chair, but his attention was somewhere else. Me. I didn't look away. I held his gaze calmly, openly. Not as a challenge, not as a plea, just as truth. He looked down first. Sometime later. I don't remember the song or the cue. I stood to stretch my legs. I needed to move, not to leave, just to breathe. The hall had grown louder, the laughter filling the rafters, the joy of the young outpacing the tension of earlier hours. I stepped out toward the hallway past the dessert table, nodding to the server who gave me a wink and slipped me a chocolate truffle without a word. And then I heard him. Mom. I turned. Michael was walking toward me, sleeves rolled tie loosened, drink in hand. He looked more like the boy I remembered, the one who scraped his knee trying to climb the fence behind our old duplex, the one who used to sleepwalk during thunderstorms and climb into my bed without a word. But that boy was long gone. "You've been busy," he said with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. I waited. All this attention, he continued. The dancing, the stories. You kind of took over the reception. There it was. The resentment, the defensiveness. Not because I had shouted or stormed, but because I hadn't. Because I had been seen without asking. I didn't take over anything I said evenly. He laughed once, bitter and low. People are talking about you more than Jessica. It's her day. I haven't taken the microphone. I haven't stood on stage. I haven't corrected anyone. You didn't have to. He snapped. You wore the dress, the badge. You knew what that would do. I tilted my head. What exactly did it do? Michael. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I took a step closer. Are you upset that people respect me or that they didn't need your permission to do so? He looked away. I didn't come here to compete, I said softly. I came here to witness your day. I bought the dress. I followed the schedule. I sat where I was told. I did not insert myself into anything. He stayed silent. But what I will not do, I continued, my voice clear now, is disappear. I spent too many years shrinking so you could stretch. I raised you. I protected you. I paid for this wedding without conditions. And the only thing I wanted in return was to be allowed to exist in the room. You don't understand, he started. I understand perfectly, I said. You've outgrown the version of me that you carried as a child. But instead of getting to know the woman I've become, you've decided to ignore her. He flinched. Just slightly. Enough to know the words had landed. A long silence stretched between us. Then, almost under his breath, he said, I didn't know they still talked about you. The army people. They do, I said, because I showed up when it mattered. I didn't wear a uniform so anyone would clap. I wore it because I've earned the right to be exactly who I am, even at your wedding. He looked down at his drink. I'm not angry, Michael, I said, and I meant it, but I won't let you shame me for being whole. Another silence. This one softer. He nodded just once. No apology, no embrace. But I hadn't asked for either. I turned and walked back toward the hall. Not triumphant, Not hurt, just whole. And for the first time in a long time, he was the one left standing still. The morning after the wedding was hushed in that particular way only early Sundays can be. Slow light filtering through the blinds, the faint hum of birdsong outside a hotel window, and the gentle rustling of wind across the manicured hedges outside. I sat up in bed and stared at the ceiling for a long while before moving. There were no texts from Michael. No, "Thank you for coming, no? Sorry about yesterday." No acknowledgement of anything that had passed between us in the hallway, or the ballroom, or the years leading up to it. And for the first time, I didn't feel the sting. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't hurt. I was simply done waiting. I made a cup of tea with the little in-room kettle and took it out to the balcony, letting the steam roll into the cool morning air. The world looked soft from up here. The flowers lining the country club lawn had held their shape overnight, though some of the centerpieces had begun to sag under their own beauty. A row of chairs still faced the altar, untouched by wind or rain, as if waiting for a second wedding that would never come. My dress hung neatly over a padded hanger beside the closet. I hadn't taken it off in anger last night. There had been no dramatic removal, no tears, just quiet hands and steady fingers unzipping and folding like a ritual. I'd laid it down gently because it wasn't the dress's fault. It was never the dress. A soft knock came at the door around 9. "Room service." "No, too light." I opened it to find a hotel staffer holding a small envelope. "This was left for you downstairs," she said. "Guy asked for it to be delivered first thing." I thanked her and closed the door before sitting back down with the envelope. The handwriting was unfamiliar, slightly uneven. Someone who didn't write letters often. Inside was a folded note. "Captain Ellis, I told my dad I met you. He cried. He hasn't done that in a long time. He said to tell you thank you for saving his life, for showing up for your country, for showing up for yourself last night. He's sending you something in the mail, a photo from Ramadi 2007. He thought you might want it. Hope I get to serve with the same backbone you carry. Jason Wolfe." I folded the letter carefully, holding it in my hands, like something fragile. So few people had ever thanked me for what I did over there. Not because they didn't care, but because I had never asked them to. I had gotten so used to folding myself small, shrinking to avoid upsetting Michael, staying silent to protect other people's comfort. I thought that was what mothers did. I thought that was what strength looked like, the absence of need. But last night had taught me something else. Strength didn't mean never being seen. It meant standing tall even when others tried not to look. I finished my tea, changed out of my pajamas, and packed my bag slowly. I had no plans for the day, and for once that didn't feel aimless. It felt open. When I returned home that afternoon, the house greeted me like an old friend, still steady, filled with the echoes of the life I'd built piece by piece. I went to the hallway closet and pulled out the long metal chest I hadn't touched in years. The latches creaked, the lid lifted. Inside were the pieces of a different version of me, the woman I had been before I started apologizing for existing. My medals were still neatly pinned to the velvet backing, my nameplate, the faded patch from my first deployment jacket, even the pocket journal I'd kept during my second tour, where I'd written one line over and over, "We don't leave anyone behind." Not today. I hadn't known then that sometimes the person I would be rescuing was myself. I placed the bronze star and purple heart onto the living room shelf. No ceremony, no spotlight, just space. They belonged out here, not in the dark. I didn't know if Michael would ever come around. I didn't know if he would ever sit across from me with honest eyes and ask, "What was it really like, Mom?" But I wasn't waiting anymore. That chapter had closed. I stepped outside with another cup of tea and sat on the porch swing. The sky had turned that soft gray-blue again. The birds hadn't gone far. Somewhere down the road a child was laughing, a sound so light it barely touched the air. I closed my eyes and listened to it all. Not the noise of the past, just this, the morning, the peace, and the simple truth that I had finally stopped asking to be allowed. I already belonged, right here, as I was, as I'd always been. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Maybe like me, you felt pushed aside. Not because you changed, but because others refused to see who you truly are. Have you ever stayed silent just to keep the peace and realized the cost was your own voice? Have you ever sat in the background of your own family's celebration wondering when you stopped being seen? If any part of this story spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story too. And if you want to hear more quiet, powerful stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Every week we share real voices that remind us dignity doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it just needs to be heard.